The forest along the Vistula River was silent, buried under a thick layer of snow. It was early 1944, and Poland was a battlefield carved by shifting lines, broken treaties, and exhausted soldiers. In a small outpost, deep in the woods, a dozen men from the Polish resistance huddled in near darkness. Their rifles were cold. Their food was low. But worst of all, communication with their main command post had been severed for days. If they couldn't reconnect soon, they would be sitting ducks for the advancing German patrols. Outside the bunker, tethered to a fallen birch tree, stood a black stallion with a long scar running down his right flank. His name was Radom, named after the city where he had been rescued by partisans the year before. Tall, muscular, with intelligent eyes, and a streak of white along his nose. Radom had served alongside this unit for months, carrying ammunition through mountain passes and messages across no man's. But tonight would be different. Tonight, he would be asked to cross enemy lines, alone. Inside the dugout, Lieutenant Marek Janowski stood over a small map lit by a single oil lamp. His face was gaunt, his uniform torn at the collar. The men waited in tense silence as he read a brief message scratched hastily on a scrap of paper. It had to reach battalion command 20 kilometers away. No radio, no messengers left. Just the horse. Marek folded the paper and slid it into a leather pouch, then looked toward the entrance where Rodom's shadow moved against the snow. "This is suicide," one of the younger soldiers whispered. "They'll spot him by morning." Marek didn't answer right away. He knew the risk. But he also knew the terrain. Radom had crossed it before. He had instincts, and perhaps something more, something that made him different. "He's not just a horse," Marek said. "It knows us, and he knows what's at stake." With trembling hands, Marek approached Radom and fastened the pouch beneath the saddle. He stroked the animal's neck once, and for a moment, the war fell away. Snow drifted from the trees. A soft wind stirred the pine branches. Rodom's breath steamed in the cold. Then, without hesitation, the horse stepped forward, hooves crunching over ice and leaves, disappearing into the darkness beyond the edge of camp. Back in the bunker, no one spoke. The silence returned, heavier than before. All they could do now was whitened pray that a lone stallion, guided by memory and instinct, could outrun the eyes of the enemy. Somewhere in the forest, under a sky thick with falling snow, a silent hero was already galloping toward history. The forest was darker now, as if the snow itself were trying to swallow the light. Radom moved with careful precision, each hoof placed exactly where instinct told him it would be quiet. His black coat blended into the night, and only the slow clouds of his breath gave him away. Every sound mattered. A snapping twig, the call of an owl, the soft patter of ice falling from pine branches, each could mean a patrol nearby, or worse. He followed a narrow trail carved by deer and partisans, weaving through frozen undergrowth and jagged roots. The wind carried distant echoes, distant boots, maybe voices, but he did not stop. The saddle on his back was light now, the pouch secured beneath it tight against his ribs. His breath came heavy, but controlled. This was not the first time Radom had moved alone. During the winter months, he had delivered messages between hilltop units, too exposed for men to reach safely. But never this deep, never this far. Somewhere beyond the forest's edge, German troops had set up temporary roadblocks and sniper nests. Radom didn't know the names of those dangers, but he felt them, the same way he felt fear in the men's hands when they loaded him with supplies, or the sadness in Marek's eyes when he fastened the pouch tonight. It wasn't training. It was something more ancient. A survival instinct sharpened by months at the edge of life and death. The moon broke through the clouds just long enough to cast light over an open stretch of frozen field, an old farm, bombed and abandoned. Radom hesitated. There was no cover, only the distant shell of a barn and the twisted ruins of a fence. But this was the fastest path. He stepped forward, low and steady, muscles rippling beneath his thick coat. The snow muffled his steps, but not completely. Somewhere, something moved. A soft click in the darkness. Stop it! From a thicket just beyond the barn, two German soldiers lit cigarettes, their helmets catching the moonlight. One turned his head, squinting into the night. Radom stood still, as if carved from ice. The smoke drifted upward. A dog barked in the far distance. But the soldiers didn't move. After a tense minute, they turned back to their conversation. Radom waited. He counted the silence in heartbeats. Then, without sound, he crossed the clearing, a shadow slipping through the wreckage of war. By dawn, he had passed the danger zone, his flanks soaked with frost. The sun rose pale and weak, casting long rays over the white horizon. Behind him, death. Ahead, hope. The message remained sealed, untouched. And Radom, the horse with no orders and no voice, kept running, not because he was told to, but because something inside him refused to stop. At dawn, the snow had settled into a deceptive stillness. The sky was pale gray, the kind that gave no hint of time. Morning could have been midnight. Back at the resistance outpost, the men emerged slowly from their bunker, breath steaming, eyes scanning the No one spoke of Radom. Not yet. It was easier to pretend they hadn't just sent a horse into the jaws of death. Easier to focus on the daily routine. Melt snow for water, check weapons, scan the horizon. But beneath the silence, they were all listening. Lieutenant Merrick stared at the trail Radom had taken, now buried under fresh snowfall. He hadn't slept. Every hour felt like another thread unraveling. The men were holding on by instinct alone. One more failed mission, one more night without orders, and they'd be swallowed by enemy forces or forced to scatter. Radom wasn't just carrying a message. He was their only chance at survival. Merrick lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Come on, boy," he muttered. "Come back." By noon, 2 scouts returned from the northern ridge with news: unusual tracks in the snow, heading south. No human prints. Just hooves. No signs of pursuit. Just steady, deliberate movement. The younger scout swore he saw the outline of a horse silhouetted against a ridge at first light. Black coat, tall, no rider. Merrick's eyes widened. That was him. One of the older soldiers scoffed. Could be any stray horse. But no one truly believed that. They had all seen how Radom moved, not like a wild animal, but like he understood. He didn't bolt at gunfire. He didn't shy from the smell of blood. And he never left without coming back. Moritanon say he had returned with blood on his flank, or a torn strap, but always with the satchel intact. "He's smarter than we are," someone once joked. But now, no one was laughing. Now, they waited. Merrick called off any unnecessary patrols. "If he makes it back," he told the men, "we move the moment the reply arrives." No one argued. Their supplies were nearly gone. Ammunition was low. If battalion command didn't respond within days, the entire unit risked annihilation. Still, Merrick couldn't shake the image of Radom, crossing those frozen fields alone, slipping past sentries and barbed wire, carrying the lives of 12 men in a leather pouch under his chest. That night, as the temperature dropped again, the outpost was quiet, not with fear but with faith. They had seen miracles before, ambushes that failed, snipers who missed, shelter found at the last moment. But this was different. Somewhere out there, a single horse was moving through enemy lines, not because he was trained to, not because someone told him to, but because he chose to. By the time Radom reached the river, the sun had begun to fall behind the blackened treetops, casting a red glow over the snow. The world around him was silent. Too silent. The forest was behind him now, replaced by low fields and open, dangerous territory where a single figure could be spotted from a mile away. But it was the river that held his attention now. Wide, slow, and half covered in ice, it flowed like a wound across the land. There was no bridge. No ford, just cracked ice, and a current too dark to judge. Radom stopped at the bank, steam rising from his back, breath heavy in the cold air. His ears twitched, catching distant movement, gunfire. Maybe, or footsteps. The message strapped beneath his chest felt heavier now. Crossing meant risking everything. But turning back was not an option. He stepped forward, testing the edge of the ice with one hoof. It held. Barely. Then another step. The ice groaned beneath his weight. long, low creaks that echoed across the water. Halfway across, the ice fractured. A front hoof slipped through the surface, plunging into black water. Radom lurched, muscles straining, hooves scrambling for grip. The leather strap under his body shifted the message pouch, threatened to tear loose. For a second, the mission trembled on the edge of failure. But Radom didn't panic. He froze, adjusted his weight, and slowly pulled the leg free, backing up slightly. The ice screamed but held. He paused, breathing hard, nostrils wide, eyes scanning for the strongest path forward. Then he moved again, slower now, almost gliding, stepping only where the cracks were fewest, following some internal map no man had drawn. Behind him, the ice shimmered with fresh breaks. Ahead, the far bank seemed just out of reach. One more misstep, and he'd vanish into the freezing current. The message lost forever, but Radom pressed forward, the muscles in his shoulders burning, the cold biting into his legs. Inch by inch, he crossed the final stretch. When his hooves finally touched earth again, they sank into frozen mud. He stumbled, legs shaking, chest heaving. But he was across. The wind hit his face again, carrying new scent smoke, gun, oil, canvas. He was close now, closer than ever. The message was still secure. The river, defiant and cruel, had failed to stop him. Somewhere to the east, command lines waited. Somewhere behind him, 12 lives still depended on his silence, his speed, and his strength. Radom didn't rest. He shook the ice from his coat, lowered his head, and began moving again, limping slightly but steady. The moon rose behind him, lighting his path in silver. He had crossed forests, enemy patrols, and now the river itself. There was no turning back. Not now. The final stretch had begun. The camp was buried in fog and half-sleep when the silhouette first appeared at its edge. A tall, dark figure moved slowly down the frost-covered trail, hooves barely making a sound. The guards at the checkpoint narrowed their eyes, unsure whether they were seeing a real animal or just another hallucination brought on by exhaustion. One of them raised his rifle. "Halt!" he barked into the mist. The figure stopped, but it didn't flee. It stood there, silent, waiting. Radom had made it, but his appearance alone, scarred, unsaddled, was far from ordinary to the soldiers at battalion command. This was no messenger. This was a threat, a trap, maybe a distraction. A lieutenant approached slowly, pistol drawn. "Whose horse is this?" he asked. No one in particular. The animal didn't react, just stared, his breath puffing white clouds into the cold morning air. That stillness, that eerie calm, unsettled everyone. Horses didn't just arrive alone from behind enemy lines. Then someone noticed the pouch. A corporal stepped forward, knelt carefully, and reached beneath Radom's belly. The leather strap was intact, and the message sealed. "Sir, ... This is real," he whispered. The officer took the note and unfolded it, eyes scanning quickly. His face changed. Tension gave way to urgency. The paper was marked with unit codes, distress signals, and coordinates clearly legitimate. "This message is from Yanowski's unit," he said. "They're still alive." The silence around the camp broke into movement. Radios crackled. Maps were unfolded. Orders were shouted, but Radom didn't move. He remained at the edge of the camp, watching it all unfold as if it had nothing to do with him. He had delivered the message, but no one had given him permission to rest. And so, he stood, waiting, tired, trembling, but unwilling to collapse. Only when a medic approached with a blanket and a bucket of water did the horse finally lower his head. As word spread, more soldiers came to see him. The horse that had walked alone through occupied territory, crossed rivers, and evaded German patrols. They whispered to one another, unsure whether to believe what they were seeing. "Is it even possible?" one asked. "How did he know where to go?" The answer, of course, was that he didn't. Not the way humans know. But somehow, against all odds, Radom had found them. Just in time, before the day ended, supply teams were dispatched. A rescue mission was launched, and in the center of it all stood Radom, no longer just a horse, but a symbol of survival, of faith, of impossible loyalty. He had reached the end of his path, but for the men still waiting in the snow-covered forest, his journey was just beginning to make its mark. The third night, without a reply, was the worst yet. Snow piled against the bunker walls, sealing in the cold like a tomb. Inside, the men burned strips of old canvas and spare rations to stay warm. Their skin had turned gray under their beards. Their voices had grown so quiet, it was like they were afraid to wake death itself. Lieutenant Merrick sat by the entrance, staring into the dark woods, his mind drifting between memory and hallucination. Every crack in the ice sounded like boots. Every gust of wind, a whisper of gunfire. No one talked about Radom anymore, not out of disrespect, but out of fear. To speak of him was to tempt fate. To hope was dangerous. The truth was, they didn't expect him to return, or, if he had reached command, they feared it would be too late. Ammunition was down to 2 clips per man. The last of the food had been rationed with nothing but melted snow to drink. They had buried one of their own, the day before frozen through. The message had been their last play. Merrick hadn't slept in 36 hours. He still wore the same gloves he had used to fasten the pouch under Rodom's body. Every so often, he'd touch the leather on his fingertips, as if by doing so, he could will the message forward. In the early hours of the morning, he finally closed his eyes, but only for a moment. A sound woke him. Faint, distant, like engines, but not enemy tanks. Softer, controlled. He scrambled outside, nearly slipping on the icy steps. At the tree line, faint headlights glowed through the fog. Then he saw them, figures moving quickly, purposefully. Allied uniforms, supply teams, armed escorts, and behind them, trucks. Real trucks. Within minutes, the bunker was surrounded not by enemies, but by men shouting Polish passwords and hauling crates of food, ammunition, and medicine. Merrick couldn't speak. He simply collapsed to his knees in the snow. The officer in charge approached him and handed him a fresh dispatch letter. "Message received," he said. "The horse made it." Merrick looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "He made it?" The man nodded, walked right into the camp like he knew the coordinates himself. The other soldiers gathered behind Merrick, staring in silent awe. For a moment, they didn't care about the food or the ammunition. They only cared about him. Radom, the horse they had trusted with everything. As crates were unloaded and bandages wrapped around frostbitten hands, the men whispered stories. They called it a miracle, a legend. But Merrick knew the truth. Radom hadn't done it for glory or instinct alone. He had done it for them, for every life still breathing. In a war where so much was lost without reason, this was something pure, something earned, a bond that not even the fire of war could burn away. WWII seen a moment like this in months. Radom stood near the center tents, loosely tied to a post, chewing hay slowly while soldiers walked past, pausing as if they didn't believe what they were seeing. They knew the stories, a horse crossing enemy lines alone, carrying a message that led to the rescue of a lost unit. Now, seeing him in the flesh card, strong and oddly serene, was like watching a legend breathing before them. Some saluted as they passed. Others offered apples or brushed his coat without being asked. He accepted all of it without pride or fear. Officers began debating what to do next. One suggested sending him back to Merrick's unit. Another said he should be kept at headquarters as a symbol of resistance. A third, more skeptical voice asked, "He's just a horse. Are we forgetting that?" But no one replied, because deep down, none of them really believed that anymore. Lieutenant WWII, the one who first read the message upon Radom's arrival, took a special interest in him. He found an old army blanket, cut it to fit the horse's back, and stitched on a makeshift insignia. Not of rank, but of recognition. He didn't follow orders, WWII said to a young recruit. He followed purpose. That's more than I can say for half the brass. Word spread. Men began calling Radom Caprol, joking at first, then not so much. Back at Merrick's recovered unit, when the supply truck returned with news and rations, Rodom's story came with it. A soldier read it aloud like scripture. The path he took, the river he crossed, how he stood still under rifle aim. Grown men sat in silence. One wept quietly. Merrick said nothing for a long time. Then finally, he muttered, "I always knew he had something in him, just didn't know how much." In that moment, Radom wasn't just their horse anymore. He was one of them. That night, a vote passed quietly among the command staff. Radom would remain with the resistance. Not as livestock, not as property, but as a figurehead, a morale anchor. No documents were signed, no medals issued. But within days, Radom's name began appearing on unofficial dispatches. Courier delivered by Corporal Radom confirmed arrival by Radom. His presence reminded them that something impossible had happened because he made it happen. In the middle of a war that had taken everything home's friends, Faith Radom had given something back. Not just survival, but belief. He didn't charge into battle. He didn't trample the enemy. He simply walked through the cold, through danger, through the worst of it, because someone had asked him to, and in doing so, he became something no one could categorize. Not a pet, not a weapon, something else entirely. The frost hadn't yet melted when the next request came in. Battalion Command, now emboldened by the success of Radom's mission, was facing a new crisis. A forward scout unit had lost contact near the Carpathian foothills. Radio silence. Dinthi terrain. Too dangerous for motorbike couriers or human messengers. The terrain was similar to the path Radom had taken beforehand that made him the obvious candidate. The message was short: deploy the horse again. But for Merrick, it hit like a hammer. He sat quietly in the back of a supply truck, the order in his hand, creased from being read too many times. Around him, soldiers joked and swapped stories, but Merrick felt the weight growing behind his ribs. To the brass, Radom was a success story. To the men, a legend, but to Merrick, he was something else entirely. A partner, a survivor, and the last living connection to a world that had once made sense. Sending him back into that void felt wrong. Merrick requested an audience with a regional command officer, a weary man with more medals than expressions. "He's not an asset," Merrick said. Voice calm but firm. "He's not a machine." The officer looked up, unimpressed, and yet he succeeded where trained men failed. "This isn't about sentiment, Latino. It's about survival." Merrick wanted to argue more, but the words dried in his throat. He knew how fragile things were. One failed message, and dozens could die. But still, was it worth asking Radom to risk everything again? That night, he visited Radom in the stable. The horse stood silently, eyes half closed, chewing slowly on hay. His body still carried the marks of his last journey, faded bruises, frost scars along his legs. Merrick approached slowly, resting a hand on his neck. "They want you to go again," he whispered. "But I'm not sure I can ask you, too." Radom turned his head slightly, nudging Merrick's chest with the soft weight of his muzzle. No fear, no resistance. Hoost Pressens. Word of the mission spread quickly. Some soldiers were angry. "He already saved us. Why risk him again?" Others believed it was his purpose now. "He's more than just an animal," they said. "He's part of this fight." But for Merrick, the noise didn't matter. What mattered was the choice, not his, but Radom's. If the horse showed any sign of fear, hesitation, injury, he'd cancel it. But Radom didn't falter. When the saddle was brought out the next morning, he stepped forward without a word. And so, once again, Radom was prepared to cross frozen valleys and hostile lands, not because anyone ordered him to, but because the fight wasn't over, and he still had something left to give. Merrick watched him go, heart torn in half. Not all heroes wear stripes, and some walk back into the storm with nothing but silence and resolve. The wind was different this time. Sharper, more erratic. As Radom moved through the hills of the Carpathian foothills, it howled between the trees, like a voice trying to warn him. The snow was no longer soft powder, but jagged ice, hard-packed and dangerous beneath each step. He was older now, not by years, but by experience. His legs still carried him, but the wear of war clung to his joints. He moved slower, but he moved. Unlike the first mission, The silence here was not peaceful. It was waiting. Every tree seemed to hide a rifle barrel, every ridge a shadow that might shift. Radom didn't have maps or intelligence, only memory, instinct, and the scent of gunpowder that clung to the wind. This message was shorter, but no less urgent. Another unit trapped, another set of coordinates in a leather pouch. Another gamble with time, terrain, and fate. Midway through the route, the path narrowed into a ravine's steep walls. No room to turn. As Radom stepped cautiously into it, a sudden crack split the air. Gunfire. A bullet ricocheted off a rock, just inches from his front leg. He froze, not from fear, but calculation. 2 more shots. Then silence. Somewhere above, a sniper had taken aim and missed. For a moment, everything stood still. Then, in one sharp burst of motion, Radom bolted forward, hooves striking sparks off stone. He ran, as he had once before, head low, muscles firing, lungs burning. But the sprint had cost him. Blood now trickled from a shallow graze along his flank. One leg began to drag slightly. The cold dug deeper into old wounds. Still, Radom kept going. Trees thinned. Smoke appeared on the horizon. Friendly smoke, the outer edge of a resistance outpost. He staggered, but did not fall. His ears pinned back. His vision blurred, but he refused to stop. Not with the message still strapped beneath him. He reached the outer fence by twilight, collapsing just outside the guard post. A young sentry rushed forward. Unsure if what he saw was real, he knelt beside the horse, hand trembling, and found the pouch still sealed. Inside, location, casualty, estimates, enemy movement. The sentry looked up in awe. "It's him," he whispered, "the one they talk about." The camp erupted into motion behind him, but Radom lay still, chest rising and falling, eyes half closed. He had made it again. Barely. Radom spent 2 days recovering at the forward outpost. Medics tended to his wounds with the same urgency they reserved for soldiers. He didn't resist, but he didn't rest easily either. Every time the wind picked up or boots crunched nearby, his ears would flick, alert. He was still on duty, even if no one was asking him to be. When word reached the main battalion that he'd survived the second mission, there were no orders, no celebrations. Just silence, the kind of silence that comes from all. When Marek arrived days later, the camp paused. He walked directly to the stable, ignoring the officers and the formalities. Radom stood, tail flicking slowly, his left flank bandaged, but healing. Marek approached, slower this time than before, his eyes wet. He placed a hand on Radom's shoulder and stayed like that for a long time. "You came back," he whispered. Again. Again. There were no medals to give, no commendations for animals. But this was a reunion the war had no power to destroy. Eventually, Marek requested that Radom be permanently reassigned not as a courier, but as a member of their unit. The request was approved, unofficially, quietly. Radom's name began to appear on supply manifests. It was listed as escort detail in convoys. When new recruits arrived, they were told the story of the horse who crossed enemy lines twice. Some laughed, some didn't believe it. But then they saw him, and they understood. Radom became more than legend. He became a source of calm. In a world filled with sudden violence and uncertainty, he was constant. His presence at camp changed the airless tension. More focus. Soldiers confided in him during night watch. Some left small carvings or charms near his stall. He never asked for anything. He never made a sound. He just was a living reminder that courage didn't always come with rank or rifle. When the war finally ended, Radom was among the few non-human survivors listed in the unit's final report. Marek ensured that his service was recorded in a letter sent to the Polish government in exile. The reply came months later. no precedent for recognition. But by then, it didn't matter. Because Radom is legacy written in metals, it was carved in memory in the frostbitten tracks he left behind, and in the hearts of those he helped bring home. Years later, when Marek told his grandchildren about the war, he didn't start with tanks or battles. He started with Radom, the horse who never spoke, never hesitated, and never once broke the bond he chose. He wasn't trained, Marek would say, he was trusted. And somehow, he knew what that meant. In a world torn apart by hate, one horse reminded them all what loyalty looked like. Not once, but twice.